Hello again, everyone. Welcome. You've reached part 66 of the Living in Faith Everyday podcast. You're doing really well because we've reached together part 46, the series I've entitled 66 Books, which is 66 short podcasts that look at the 66 books of our Bible. And today we'll be considering the book of 1 Corinthians, the book of disorders in the church. 1 Corinthians is Paul's longest letter. It has been called by some a letter of reprimand, intensely practical in its outlook and recognized by many as containing some of the very greatest passages of New Testament writing. The Apostle Paul wrote 1 Corinthians, and he identifies himself as the author many times throughout the letter. There are also very strong early witness accounts to Pauline authorship of 1 Corinthians. None less than Clement of Rome in 95 AD wrote to the Corinthian church, quoting and crediting Paul's letter several times. Corinth, the city, was a prosperous manufacturing centre and seaport in the southern part of Greece. A main road connected it with important towns to the north, and sea routes connected it to other ports in the east, west, and south. The city was very well known for its immorality, to the point that people commonly referred to a person of loose morals as one who behaved like a Corinthian. Yet Paul still chose to plant a church there, and soon, maybe not surprisingly, it became one of the most colourful yet troublesome churches of all the early churches. Paul established this church in Corinth during his second missionary journey. He began his work there by preaching in the synagogue each Sabbath and working during the week at his usual trade of a tent maker. But eventually the local Jews forced him out of the synagogue there, but he went and preached in the house next door. During the 18 months that Paul stayed in Corinth, he suffered constant persecution, both from within the Jewish community and outside the greater community. But by the time he left, 18 months later, he had still managed to firmly establish the Corinthian church. 1 Corinthians itself says Paul wrote it, and it says he wrote it from Ephesus. Chapter 16 verse 8 tells us that. It also says he planned to base himself in Ephesus until Pentecost and then to go and visit the Corinthian church while passing through Macedonia. From Corinth he then planned to go on to Jerusalem with the offering which he had been raising for the believers there, and it is generally agreed that this letter was written during the spring of the last year of Paul's ministry at Ephesus. We know that Paul was in Ephesus from 53 to 57 AD, thus the standard view is he wrote 1 Corinthians in the early spring of 57 AD. While Paul was at Ephesus on his third missionary journey, he received reports from the household of Chloe concerning quarrels in the church at Corinth. The church even sent a delegation of 3 men who apparently brought him a letter requesting Paul's opinion on several issues. From these events and from Paul's reference to that letter, we can make these conclusions. 1. There were factions among the believers at Corinth. 2. There was gross immorality in the church, even sexual immorality. In fact, even incest is referred to. Thirdly, the Corinthians were taking each other to court. And then finally, there were several other practical matters concerning faith and life that troubled them. The message of the book is Paul's attempt to deal with disorder in the church. This included personal divisions among people, discipline problems, and various other difficulties, and he's teaching how they should be dealt with according to the particular characteristics of each problem, always with the ultimate aim of getting people to live harmoniously together in love. The overall structure of 1 Corinthians generally follows the format of all ancient letters of that time, with a greeting, thanksgiving, prayer, then the main body of the letter where he deals with the issues, and then finally some personal greetings and a blessing. The first purpose of 1 Corinthians is to correct those disorders that are existing in the church. Paul had heard about these divisions from the household from Chloe and from the letters he'd received. Other things that were going wrong in the church were also being commonly reported. and he writes this letter as a corrective response. Paul also intended to teach and address some doctrines that were being rejected by some in the church. The second purpose of 1 Corinthians is to specifically answer the questions that had been submitted to him. The Corinthian church had written to Paul asking him questions dealing with marriage, food offered to idols, even things like the veiling of women in church and other aspects of worship, the Lord's table, how that should be done, and some teaching and questions were asked about spiritual gifts and the resurrection, and even about whether offerings and collections should be taken from the poor and for the poor. He addresses these issues by instructing, rebuking, condemning, yet at the same time always encouraging them. So, to summarize this book, it is a response primarily to a report from Chloe's household and information he had received elsewhere in the form of a letter. Paul is writing to the Corinthians to correct disorders and to answer their questions on a variety of subjects, dealing according to the particular characteristics of each problem, but always with the aim of getting believers to live harmoniously together in love. Believers, he teaches, should deal with problems, but always with the ultimate aim of living out the gospel in love together.